Here is the evidence in favor of a short 5-month tribulation period. I speak of 5 months. This is based on Revelation 9, verse 5 and 10, which speaks of 5 months in which killing has stopped. This would be the period of the occupation after the war is over, the war in which Russia overruns Western Europe. At the same time, they bomb America to prevent us from interfering with the Russian conquest of Western Europe. This is from Daniel 7, verse 8, where it says, one horn will invade the presence of 10 horns. The horns are kings, we are told in verse 24 or 25, but kings rule nations, so by extension, the 10 horns are 10 nations. And the 11th horn that comes up among the 10, that's talking about Russia invading 10 nations. Actually, it's much more than 10, but it's been simplified, dumbed down to just 10 nations in Europe. Okay, here is the evidence in favor of a 5-month tribulation period. Christ said, behold, I come quickly. Revelation 13, verse 11. Revelation 22, verse 7, verse 12, and verse 20. Now, quickly here implies he comes soon. Soon after some point in time, some starting point. It cannot mean quickly after Christ's resurrection 2,000 years ago, because, like I say, 2,000 years have already passed. But if Christ means he is coming soon after the tribulation begins, well then, this points to his return after a very short tribulation. Now I want to emphasize that Christ says in Matthew 24:22 that he will shorten the trib. So he emphasizes the shortness of the trib. He says if it was not shortened, no flesh would survive. Now he's talking there, in my opinion, about a Chinese-Russian war. That would be a very massive super war. And Christ comes before that war can begin. Now, why would China and Russia go to war after Russia takes Europe and wipes out America's big cities? Well, China will not like that one bit. China's two top trading partners are America and Europe. So China will be thoroughly insulted, feel insulted and victimized by losing its two top trading partners due to Russian aggression, Russian war making. So this would explain why a Chinese attack on Russia and a Russian attack on China would take place soon after Russia's conquest of Europe, if not for the fact that Christ will come quickly enough to head off that super war. If we can use the start of the trib as a starting point of the short period of time that is implied in the words, I come quickly or soon, well then, the 5 months in Revelation 9, verse 5 and 10 would seem to be realistic, a realistic possibility. For if Christ does come just 5 months after the trib begins with the Russian attack on America and conquest of Western Europe, he really would be coming quickly. He would really fulfill the words, I come quickly. This line of reasoning rules out a 7-year trib. For if Christ comes 7 whole years after the tribulation begins, after a reign of Russian terror over the whole world begins, well then, that does not fulfill the words, I come quickly. Not at all. Let me close by pointing out once again that Christ does emphasize the shortness of the trib in Matthew 24:22. He declares he will shorten the trib because otherwise no flesh would survive. A 7-year war, a 7-year trib does not make sense in this context, because if a Russian-Chinese war is about to take place due to China's anger against Russia for taking over Western Europe and wiping out America, well then, 7 years, Christ waiting 7 years, that would not make sense, because that would give China and Russia enough time to make war and wipe out a great number. It would be a super catastrophe. I'm going to write a transcript in the description box under this video, and I want you to copy it down, because you cannot rely on computers to store information in the event of EMP, electromagnetic pulse, which surely will come along with the Russian bombing of America's big cities. I'm expecting the attack next year around Pentecost, and the 5 months would end around the Feast of Tabernacles. Feast of Tabernacles is in October, so it really is 5 months after Pentecost. We can think in terms of this big event, the beginning and the end. The end would be marked by the second coming of Christ. We can think of these two poles, the beginning of the trib and the end of the trib, as naturally something that would be tied to the holy times, the feast times that are in the law of Moses. Paul the Apostle says the law, the holy times there in the law are prophetic of things to come. So it implies that the big events, certain events, end-time events, will occur in connection to the feast times in the law of Moses. Now, like I say, if the trib begins at Pentecost and ends at Tabernacles, that would fulfill Paul's words. His words are in Hebrews 10, verse 2, Colossians 2, 15 through 17.